But there are three main approaches in the manifesting lab that you may have noticed. The first is the approach of purity to manifesting. The second is the approach of power to manifesting. And the third is the approach of keeping clean in manifesting. It may not have occurred to you, but all these approaches are actually linked together. It is not just me randomly throwing out techniques. The approach we take in the manifesting lab is to generate purity, add power to the purity, and if there's resistance in the power, we clean it up so we get back to purity. So there is this cycle that's going on. Now, rather than leave you with that vague explanation, let's delve down a little bit deeper and you'll see how everything, or most of the things you've learned in the manifesting lab up to now, have fitted into these categories, and you'll see how they've all been gradually combining themselves. And today, I'm hopefully going to bring them all together in one particular technique that I think is remarkably powerful. But in order to get there, we need to have an understanding of everything that's gone before. So let's take a look at purity first. Now, purity underlies pretty much everything in the manifesting lab. It is purity of thought we're thinking about, and it's the first and most important element within the manifesting lab. The purity of thought is really comes down to this idea that I've spoken about many times of absence versus presence, and you will see that right at the start of the ultimate manifesting framework. The basic idea is that at its very core, at its very essence, you could almost say the universe is a manifesting machine, as far as we are concerned, from our human perspectives. It's really that simple. You don't have to overcomplicate this. If you don't get what you want, it's because the absence of what you want was greater than the presence of what you wanted. And there's really not much more to it than that. It's a bit like Abraham said earlier, that to get a castle or a button, just focus on a castle or a button. So the idea is so ridiculously simple. You get what you feel more present about. Now, it's very tempting to come out with all sorts of reasons why you haven't got what you got, and you can lay over all kinds of value judgments about, oh, this is good or this is bad, or other people who want to control you can tell you that you didn't get it because you didn't do what they said you should do. But all of that is not really relevant. I mean, you can believe it if you want and set up a limiting belief system, but it really just comes down to absence versus presence. And so at the very start of the ultimate manifesting framework, I was really ranting away there, telling you it always comes down to this. No matter how complicated the techniques appear to become, no matter what problems you seem to have with them, as long as you can remember the absence versus presence balance, you'll always know where you are in the manifesting ideas. So purity, that's where we started from. Then we moved into absence versus presence. And then we talked about the ultimate purity, which is the empty mind. Now, an empty mind is the most pure you can get because there's really nothing there. I mean, how much purer can you get than nothing whatsoever? So in some respects, the empty mind of meditation is the best starting point for generating purity of thought. And the reason we generate purity of thought is because when you're starting from a neutral place, it's much easier to direct where your thoughts should go than if you're fighting against a raging torrent of thoughts that are going in a certain direction. And so that's why I recommended right at the very start, and hopefully you are still doing this, that you wake up in the morning with your empty mind, or hopefully empty for a few seconds at least, and you meditate. And you spend the remarkable amount of time of perhaps 15 minutes if you can, because that's all it takes. And for anyone that thinks 15 minutes is too much, that's not really the case, because there's quite a few more blocks of 15 minutes in the average 24-hour day. But the point of the meditation is that that tiny, tiny block of time influences the rest of the day. And if you do it consistently, that influence just grows and grows and grows. So at the very core of purity then in the Manifesting Lab, we have meditation. As I said, that's the empty mind. But once we practice an empty mind, the next thing we can do is give that empty mind a nudge towards a direction that we want it to go in. And so the next thing within the Manifesting Lab that you learn is grid work. And that really is such a gentle nudge, going from no thought to the tiniest hint of a thought. So going from ease to just a few words, relaxing, soft, gentle, peaceful. And you will have found that just those few words can set something rolling throughout the day. That's how powerful it is to start from purity. So grid work was what we moved on to as far as purity is concerned from meditation. And then logically, the next thing to do after grid work, if grid work is like nudging a thought towards moving slowly, the next thing is to nudge a thought towards moving a bit faster. And so we have this idea of boosted grid work. Now, for those of you who have been in the Manifesting Lab, you'll know that the difference in time between the previous slide and this one was probably a year or so. But from a logical point of view, it is still just a logical progression from the slightest hint of a thought in grid work. And what boosted grid work is all about is you take that tiny little thought that you've nudged, and now you push it a little bit faster by looking at other things that make you feel that same emotion. So each time you look at something that makes you feel the emotion a bit more, you add some momentum to that thought. So that tiny nudge of a thought that you started with from purity starts to grow in power. And so this is a visual representation of boosted grid work. This one comes from the brain software, but it's exactly the same approach in the Manifesting Lab forum software. You're just seeing the links in this particular diagram, that's all. So, purity, giving it a little nudge with grid work, and then giving it a bigger nudge with boosted grid work. So we've added more power, you could say, in a pure way, by adding more momentum to that initial nudged thought. And then the next stage after that, as far as purity is concerned, and it's almost, in some respects, it's almost the ultimate wave of momentum behind purity, is this concept of vibrational world exploration, which we had an entire webinar about. And this is where we take our collections of good feeling things that we boost with grid work and we explore them. We roam around this thing called the virtual vortex, which is a collection of very pure good feeling thoughts. And we just explore it. We take different and varied vibrational pathways to explore the vibrational world that we've created. And the upshot of that is that every day of exploration is new, fresh, and exciting. That helps us then practice that purity even more. Now, when you are this pure, that's what's known as the receiving mode, or it's what Abraham called the receiving mode, and we had an entire webinar on that. when you practice being in that receiving mode, things manifest for you pretty much automatically. And you will have heard me talk during the Vibrational World Exploration webinar about how you almost generate a vibrational shield about you, because the purity is so strong and so pure that anything that is impure in your physical reality kind of bounces off. And so within the manifesting lab, despite the fact there's been probably almost a couple of years difference between the start of our purity journey and the end of it, there has been a building towards getting purity handled. So we started with meditation, moved on to grid work, moved on to boosted grid work, moved on to vibrational world exploration. It's all heading towards stronger and stronger purity. So that's one pillar of the manifesting lab we have been exploring up to now. The other pillar, or the other part of the triad, you could say, is the idea of power. The purity is fantastic. And if you did nothing else but purity, you'd get everything you wanted in life. But that's not enough. Because as human beings, we like to focus. We don't like to be passive. Purity is a somewhat passive activity. Even with vibrational world exploration, it is still relatively passive compared to focus. An active focus actually thrills us if we do it in the right way. So the other part of the triad then in the manifesting lab is getting this focus out there and doing it in the right way. And in the ultimate manifesting framework, we investigated this focus with the idea of the spectrum of specificness. And what that's about is the fact that there is a journey when you want to manifest a thought. You start off with a desire, and ultimately you want that desire to be physically perceivable, which is what a manifestation is. And on that route to being physically perceivable, that desire goes from being general as far as your conscious physical mind is concerned to being specific, so specific that it's manifested. And so what we can do in order to make that happen is start to focus more and more and more on that desire. What we did in the manifesting lab was we learned how to analyze our missing emotions behind the desire and then apply those missing emotions in a very specific way to the desire to gradually make it more and more specific. But there comes a point at which we get so specific that we no longer feel good. So you could say up to here, we can feel specific in a good feeling way, and here is kind of like a barrier, because if we go any further than this good feeling, we start to feel bad. Now, why are good and bad feelings important? Well, we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But you could say that bad feelings kind of get in the way of what you want to manifest, and good feelings kind of help you manifest it. So the bad feelings you can call resistance, and the good feelings you can kind of call presence. And so resistance is kind of the absence idea again, just in a slightly different word. And so with the spectrum of specificness, what this thing told us is that we can only reach a certain point of getting specific before we kind of have to back off from the thing that we're trying to manifest. And then there's this gap before that needs to be filled in before the thing does manifest. But it doesn't mean we have to fill it in. But we can if we want to. And I'm going to show you how in this webinar. Now, in order to reach this maximum presence point, what I suggested was you take some pure statements about your desire and you add them to your missing emotions that you manifest, and you link those two together. And when you do that, you create something called the basic emotion overlay. Now, all of this is in the Ultimate Manifesting Framework, and none of this should be of a surprise to you. But this mere act of linking your what and why statements with that missing emotion helps you add maximum specificness, so the maximum journey you can take towards your manifestation, towards kind of making it happen. But, and I ought to add that when you do this, you get the byproduct of impulses and inspirations, which are extremely helpful to guiding you further towards filling in that gap. But there is an interesting thing that happens as you start to play with these what and why statements in the basic emotion overlay. And that's that as you get more and more specific about the thing that you want, as you add more momentum to the thought you're trying to manifest, that emotion overlay starts to get a bit out of control. So that simple what and why statement can build up into something not so simple. And so what happens is we can end up with things that actually look a bit like that as far as what and why statements are concerned. And so we've gone from almost a way of adding pure specificness to starting to scatter our focus, because when you look at a list like this, it's just overwhelming. You can't really remember what it is you're after. You're so blasted with details. And in the Ultimate Manifesting Framework, I mentioned that that's the same kind of issue like a newspaper would have, because a newspaper is trying to impart a lot of information to you, but it doesn't want to do so in a way that's going to overwhelm you and not make you want to read that information, because that's how they make money. They sell it to you. So there are certain formats that you use, such as having headlines, such as having pictures, in order to convey a lot of overview information, quite simply, and then still leaves place to have the detail information. And so in that kind of way, we split our emotion overlays into two. We had one which was the basic one that I've spoken about, and then we had this idea of the advanced emotion overlay, which is almost just the newspaper story itself, rather than the headline. And in the advanced emotion overlay, which I recommended you might wish to use some mind mapping kind of software for, or do it on paper, or just brainstorm it any way that works for you, you get into far, far more detail about your desire. You're getting more specific about your desire, but you're not getting in the way of the overview of the basic emotion overlay. You still know what you want and why you want it, but now you're kind of just playing with the vision of it. And you can get into tremendous detail with this if you really wanted. This is the emotion overlay for the launch of the Manifesting Lab itself. I turned it on its side because it wouldn't fit on the screen. So you can go crazy with this stuff, and that's great. But there comes a point when you start adding in more and more specificness that you reach so much specificness that you want to start to take action. The specificness level reaches a point that it's starting to just flow over into the world of physical action. And so in order to deal with action, we spoke about chickens in the Ultimate Manifesting Framework, or a particular kind of chicken. We spoke about the inspired action chicken, which almost sounds like some superhero kind of chicken. An inspired action chicken was the method I suggested to you to handle it when your emotion overlays start getting so detailed that you want to take action. You want to get into the nitty-gritty of doing stuff. And obviously, it wasn't this kind of chicken. It was more to do with this kind of chicken. The kind of chicken that people play with cars when they don't have anything better to do. And I don't know, maybe you kind of do that when you're bored. Maybe you have a lot of cars. I don't know. But you are playing chicken. And who are you playing chicken with? Well, you're playing chicken with the universe. With Inspired Action Chicken, it's kind of a game of chicken as regards who does the physical action. So with that advanced emotion overlay, all that complex stuff that you've been working with, you reach a point where you want to do an action, but is it sufficiently inspired to you? Do you really, really want to do it? Or is it just that maybe you're kind of in two minds about it? With Inspired Action Chicken, the idea is you don't take the action as long as you can possibly bear not to take it. And they will reach a point where you just absolutely have to do it. And when you reach that point, then you can legitimately do it. But before that point, you play chicken with the universe and see if the universe is going to do it first. So that's Inspired Action Chicken. So remember where we are in the description of what we've been doing in the manifesting lab. We've done all our purity on one side of things. We're doing our power on this side of things. But this is not the only way to add power to manifesting desires. We can play with the emotion overlays, do your Inspired Action Chicken, but we also added in another approach to playing with desires. And this is an approach we added in a webinar called Non-Resisted Desires. And a lot of this was based around an idea that Abraham had, that the most effective way to manifest what you want is to be happy where you are and be eager for more. And so with this magical manifesting map, I gave you a fairly detailed explanation. I mean, literally an entire webinar just on this diagram to kind of get you thinking in the right way, such that when you did focus on your desires with positive expectation, it would be the most effective way to get more power, to get more specificness on those desires. And so the magical manifesting map is another tool that helps you think through how to deliberately manifest. But the purpose of it is, again, it's to add to the power of what we're doing in the manifesting lab. So let's just recap quickly the building blocks of power, because we've had the building blocks of purity. So we've had missing emotions, which you analyze from your what and why statements. You then take those missing emotions and dump them over your what and why statements, and you create this thing called the basic emotion overlay that I showed you a few moments ago. You can then branch out into more detail with those basic overlays without overwhelming your what and why statements by getting into mind maps if you want, or whatever brainstorming techniques you prefer, and getting involved in Inspired Action Chicken. And then we went to the non-resisted desires and all that magical manifesting map kind of stuff, where you make peace with your current reality, first of all, in order to lay a suitable bedrock in order to manifest from a foundation. And then on top of that, you started to enhance your desires with expectation. And so that's the second part of the triad within the manifesting lab. Purity plus power. And again, that path to power has happened over nearly 2 years, but it's been a steady movement in that direction. And now the third element of the manifesting lab, the third element of this triad, is that of keeping clean. Now, keeping what clean? Well, it's keeping your vibration about your desire clean. So we're back to that purity idea again. But this time it's about getting back to purity from an impure place instead of starting from purity like first thing in the morning. And so in the manifesting lab itself, you'll find there have been presented a whole series of methods to help you get back to purity when you're not flowing your energy purely. And I'll throw out just a few of these methods. I'm not going to go through them. They're all over the Manifesting Lab, either in courses or webinars or in the forum itself. But I'll just throw out a few words and you'll recognize, hopefully, most of them. There's Abraham's calibration approach. There's the vibrational nudging. There's EFT, emotional freedom technique, that we've spent a few webinars on from time to time. There's focus blocks, focus wheels. Still a tremendously powerful cleanup technique. There's the vibrational knot disentangler, which is, again, a very powerful method. Abraham's emotional grid. And the 45-second method, probably one of my favorites now. Not from Abraham, this one. This is from the 9th Dimensional Palladian Collective, but an incredibly versatile, incredibly powerful cleanup method. Maybe at some point I'll talk about this a bit more. It is a tremendous method. I've been really hammering this one. It's detailed in the Manifesting Lab forum. Check it out if you haven't. It is tremendous for cleaning stuff up. And then very recently, I've been talking about a very much bigger version of cleaning, where you're not only cleaning up your desire in order to get it to manifest, you're cleaning up collective desires. You're cleaning up the entire world in order to get global desires to manifest the way you want. So that's what I call bridging, and that's where you take on the role of the bridger, the one who bridges the gap between where people are collectively and where they want to be collectively. So altogether, you see, we have actually had a steady progression over nearly 2 years of the Manifesting Lab. What I've given you there is a very, very quick overview. But I hope you can see it's not been a random journey. It's been steadily and systematically leading you towards more and more purity, power, and keeping clean, so that you can start to get even more powerful and systematic with your manifesting.